Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Kimbrough with Independent Bank. As sponsor, we're grateful for you all to be able to join us today. One thing I love about this organization is our ability to serve our clients. In recent months, our community has experienced unforeseen changes and business owners with the stress of making necessary changes for their day-to-day operations. As a banker, it's extremely important for us to be that resource for our clients. Responsibility, shared community, these are just some of the things that we care about. These are some of the things that help us serve our community heroically. So again, thank you for joining us today. And if any of you have any questions, feel free to contact us at Independent Bank, and we'll be glad to be a resource to you and your business. Thank you and be safe.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And again, thank you to Independent Bank. We're going to, at this moment, transition into conversation. And first of all, let me thank our President, Beverly Robertson. She'll be joining us in a bit, and you'll hear from her near the end of the conversation. But where we are right now is that this is one of those conversations where we have a great example as we talk about MWBE and minority and women-owned business enterprises and the emphasis and focus that they've received in recent years, if you will, as we attempt to speak to the disparity studies that have been done by government and wanting to see us get supplier diversity diversified, if you will. We have a great example in our community that they've done well for many years, and we wanted to have the opportunity to let them have the opportunity to share. And I want to share the title is Shaping Minority and Women-Owned Business Participation from the Top. We've recognized that the heads of organizations play a critical role in what happens to that organization and the role that they take on as it relates to supplier diversity. And I don't think there's many better examples than what we see with our airport authority. So with that said, I want to present Scott Brockman, the president and CEO of the Memphis Shelby County Airport Authority, and Joe Claiborne, the senior manager of the business diversity development with Memphis Shelby County Airport Authority. They're going to have a conversation, and in that conversation, I think that we'll see a lot come out, and we'll hear quite a few things that I think can be informative and instructive to those of you on the line. So with that said, Scott, Joe, I'm turning my camera off, and the floor is yours.
Well, Bobby, thank you very much. You know, it's an honor for Joe and I to be with you today. When we were contacted by the chamber to do this, we wholeheartedly embraced the opportunity because basically it's because how proud we are of what the airport authority tries to do every day in its business operations with regard to minority business participation. When I took over in 2014, Joe and I sat down and as my go-to guy in our business diversity development program, we sat down and we talked about the title of the department at that time. And the title at that time was contract compliance. And I really didn't like that title because it implied that the role of the department was more of an auditing or a policing function, not really the development of business opportunities and partnership that we wanted to have in our program. So Joe and I sat down and talked, and we settled on business diversity development as the title, because the whole role, I wanted the focus of the department, and Joe was all on board to be developing those relationships with our minority businesses and figuring out how to best reach out to that very important critical element of our community and bring them into the family of the airport authority for contracting opportunities. Joe, you remember that discussion? Give your thoughts to the audience about how we did that and why it's important.
No doubt, it was very important. We took to realize that oftentimes that when you hear the word compliance and whenever you think about contract compliance, it always give off the indication that this was some type of policing and oversight group. And because our theme and our whole idea was on helping minority and women-owned businesses to grow and develop, we had to kind of evolve from that. It was a good start. It helped us to get to where we were, but at the same time, we had to be able to evolve. So by taking on now the onus of being recognized as business diversity development, we now look at the fact that we can now not only embrace the opportunities to do some of the things that we had already began doing. We've always had some type of history of trying to find minority and women-owned businesses that could easily work with some of the projects and things that we had going on. But we had to grow to a point that when we began looking at building relationships with these business owners and therefore gaining their trust to be able to say that we want you to do business with the Memphis Airport Authority, and therefore the developmental piece was very important. And because of that, we were able to then create more relationships in the city. We was able to create synergies amongst the other quasi-governmental agencies. And by doing so, then we were able to create best practices, things that we can do that would be able to help those minority women-owned businesses to develop their core. We had to look at how we're going to be able to help these companies grow from being just a participant, just a subcontractor, to maybe becoming a prime, and not just becoming a prime, but being an integral piece of what we was trying to do. So that day was a really good start, and I can see us growing even from there.
And so can I, Joe. Thank you. So the reason why, this was important to me was the title of Tone from the Top. Memphis International, the airport authority, is my fourth airport in my career. And I have been in organizations where, yes, the CEO has said, we need to participate in this. And the challenge there is that word, we need to participate in this. Not we're committed in participating in this. And so it was more of a box to check as opposed to a true commitment to working with the program. And why it's important for me to be directly involved from my perspective is it sets that level of importance to everyone else in the organization. It says Joe and Scott are communicating, Joe and Scott are together on the program, and the department is doing the right things, and the CEO buys into it. So then everyone else has to become, within the airport authority, has to become partners in that process. And I believe that has worked very well here across all of our areas, whether it's contracting for construction or procurement of goods and services or contracting. I think our business diversity development department under Joe's leadership, quite frankly, has done great things. And I'm proud of them every day. And, so Joe, your perspective on on what's important with the involvement of myself with your team.
Well, it all begins with intentionality. We had to be careful in our thought process on how we can be more intentional about bringing businesses on board. And let's be frank, this is not new. This is not something that we just started doing. The history of the Memphis airport even would take it back to the point that under Larry Cox is part of the founding members of the then Memphis Purchasing Council, which came out of the chamber and then evolved into what we know now as MWBEs. Prior to coming to the Memphis airport, I was a member of MWBEs. I was part of that. Luke Yancey has always been a mentor of mine, and I took and gleaned a lot from that. So it wasn't a difficult task that 14 years ago when I came aboard the Memphis airport, that we would continue on with that process. One of the things that we did early on was that we looked at bringing certification in-house. When we brought certification in-house, it was intentional. Our intent was to try to be able to say that we want to build relationships with our local minority and women-owned businesses. So by doing that, we were able to start from there. But again, it still did not stop. We've had instances and times since then where part of our intentionality, give a perfect example, we're right now in the middle of what we call, a remodernization of our Concourse B. About 3+ years ago, we started something we called the Big Three. And the Big Three at the time was our concourse modernization, it was our rental car facilities, as well as the phase 1 of our de-icing facility. All these will either be running simultaneously or concurrent with each other. And because of it, we knew that there was going to be a great opportunity for our local MWBEs to be a part of that process, but we could not wait until we sent out the RFPs and RFQs. So we took an opportunity, and because of the leadership, Mr. Brockman and those who are part of the leadership of the airport, we decided, hey, let's give our local MWBEs time. So 8 months before the project even hit the street, we had a big open house out at the guest house, and we brought in businesses, we brought in prospective primes, we brought in prospective MWBEs, and we told them not just about the scope of the work, but more specifically to our local MWBEs, what it's going to take for you to increase bonding capacity, increase your insurance, increase your lines of credit so that you will be ready to bid on these projects. So to be intentional, we knew that we just couldn't keep doing it the same way. We had to go out and redo things and maybe even to the point refocus. So intentionality became something great for us.
Yeah, and I think that's a key word, Joe, and you and I talk about it all the time with the rest of our team, is there's a difference between putting a clause in a contract and just saying that somebody needs to show good faith efforts and having the intention of truly partnering with a minority or woman-owned business, bringing them to the table and actually letting them actively participate in what we're trying to do in any one of the facets of our contracts. And so that's a word you and I talk about, I know, all the time, and I love hearing you say it because of the passion you do. You know, Joe, talk about a little bit about some of the, I know you talked about our outreach. Talk about our percentages and how, you know, and how we go about, I know it's a point of our focus, and you and I talk about it, what our goals are and what our accomplishments are, because in my mind, the goals are really what we shoot for as a minimum. If we can get higher than that, then that's even better. But yeah, talk about how you and your team go about running with that ball and carrying out that mission.
Well, it's excellent. It goes right back into that pre-planning that we talked about. It's easy for us to say that we can put an aspirational goal, but we don't deal with aspirational goals, because aspirational goals are those things that we kind of cross our fingers and hope it works out that way. But instead, what we do is that we look at our marketplace. We look at those DBEs and MWBEs in our marketplace who've already showed that they are ready, willing, and able to do the work. And because they've shown that, we go a little further. We actually communicate with them. We talk to them, find out, because we do realize that as much as we want to see companies work in these projects, we want to make sure that it's also a good fit for them. You have the NAICS capability by nomenclature to do the work, but do you actually have the time and the capacity right now to actually start another project, maybe to do multiple projects at one time? So we do a lot of that by sitting down, looking at forecasted opportunities, forecasted reports, seeing what's coming out, talking to the companies and say, this is about to take place, this is about to happen. What can you do? And because of that, when we set goals, they're realistic goals. And when we did our modernization project, we set a goal of about 20, I think the goal was 26%, but we've exceeded it around 29% to date. We had other projects where on our rent-a-car facility at 26%, but we exceeded that process. We exceeded it not just because our intent was to just say, here's a goal and we're going to just go past and blow past that goal, but to make sure that we get some real good data into it. People working that, and here's the other part, we want to keep as much of it as local as possible. We want to keep as many of those MWBEs who are working on our projects. We hope that we can develop them local so they can stay local, because what good is it to have a company who is local who missed out on the opportunity to bid on a project because they wasn't aware of it. So we make them aware of it. we get them involved, we keep them going on what's going on, so goals become realistic. As much as we set the goal, it's not just about us trying to reach a goal and all this about reaching a goal. It's about development of company that ultimately will become a larger, greater company that will bring somebody else up along the way.
So what are our, I know we do goals over multi-year periods, 3 years, I believe. What are our current goals? Because I know that when we set the last goals, we estimated that the concourse modernization program, I think we estimated would generate opportunities of about $59 million over the life of that program. The entire program, not just the concourse modernization, the big three. So what are our current goals and percentages and where are we at right now with our goal setting?
Well, right now, one of the process, again, when we talk about setting goals, we have what you said, that 3-year goal. That's where we sit down and we forecast projects in advance, and we say, okay, these are projects that's on our horizon. Based off those projects, based off the NAICSs of the companies that we know that are within our database and that are ready, willing, and able to do the work, we'll set a goal. Goal, in this case, for that 3-year goal is 26%. But that is, again, one of those goals we set with the idea that based off what we currently are doing, we should be able to easily attain that goal. But then we have contract goals, which is to say for every project, we'll go back and review it. Because guess what? When we set that 3-year goal, that was several years ago with an anticipation that we would be able to do so. But we go back and we revisit every contract that says that now which companies are still today ready, willing, and able? Which companies are today ready to move forward? Which companies are today are ready to actually take on this project? And we had a challenge even with that big three, because we were going to have several $100 million worth of projects that we felt like we would have companies in our local area who could participate. But what happens when they all get on projects and they all participate and then the next big project comes along? Will we have companies who will be able to diversify and do more? Or are there still other companies that we've yet to reach out to and therefore we can bring them on board? So each goal and each project had its own goal and it was very realistic. So when we set the goal on, again, on the modernization project, we set it based off what we believed at that point that we can easily attain based off the companies who were ready, willing, and able, and at 26%. But like I said, we ended up at 29. So we know that we're going. And each phase, we are now getting ready to go into phase 3, or actually have begun phase 2 of our de-icing facility. And we're already forward thinking toward phase 3. And because of it, we're already thinking about what that's going to look like. So we're getting ready to start talking about companies and how that's going to work. But guess what? We have another issue on the table. The new issue on the table is how do we do that in a pandemic? How do we do that in the midst of all that's going on? So we had to kind of shift focus a little bit. Again, like you said, it wasn't just about reaching goals. It's about the relationships. So one of our new shifts because of the pandemic was then to say, okay, instead of looking for companies who are ready right now to do this work, let's get ahead of the curve and start doing wellness checks and check on companies who we have done work with in the past. How do they, how they are managing during this pandemic? Are there avenues that we can help them and to try to find, whether it be joint venture opportunities, whether to do other type of teaming on projects, or maybe to look at their business model and just say, maybe we need to revamp this. We have those opportunities. So when we set a goal, it's not just all about reaching that number, but it's about developing that company.
Well, and exactly. And Joe, great articulation of what we try to do. And speaking of joint ventures, we talked about that, back with the modernization and the consolidated de-ice facility. Because those projects are so big, we did worry about, bonding and things like that we didn't start artificially or unintentionally exclude people. So, you know, and we talked about joint venturing kind of in a different light, and that was, are there opportunities for two electrical companies that individually, neither one may have the bandwidth, may have the size to do the scope of a particular project, but if they were to joint venture themselves and join forces, then they could share in that wealth for the growth of both companies, not just one, or in the case of if they, you know, both looked at it individually, maybe neither. And I think that's one of the things that sets the airport authority apart, is that we look at, you know, you know, Joe is, I got to tell you, the part of the passion and part of the pride that I have is the creativity that our team has in looking at these projects and saying, what do we really need to do? That's, Joe, you use that word, and I love that word. You know, that intentionality. When you really have an intent to partner with the local community, the local minority community, all of a sudden creative juices flow on how things can get done. You agree?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And allow me to say this too as well, Scott. You know, the diversity team is not a one-man team. It's not Joe Claiborne alone. Actually, there are 5 members of the diversity team between Regina Armstrong, Patrick Woods, Tony Whitlow, and Stephanie Jeffries. And one of the challenges that I always try to propose to them is, let's not just, when I, you know, we use the phrase think outside the box. We, not necessarily to say to that degree, but I try to challenge them with other thought patterns in mind. What Stephen Covey, think with the end in mind. We try to think about what we need to do and how we can then better be advocates then even for those MWBEs who are looking to do work with us. So it challenges us oftentimes to say, okay, here are the things that we're aware of. Here are some of the issues that, even some of the issues that some of the current contractors are having, our MWBEs. How can we now mitigate that so we won't have to deal with that again? You know, what are the barriers that may be in place that we can get ahead of the curve and say, okay, this was a problem before, let's try to get ahead of this so it won't be a problem again. And let me tell you, these guys are good. They're really good. And we come together, we put our heads together, we come up with concepts and ideas. And one of those that you just stated was an idea that we came up with, where instead of having one company who struggled to get a piece of the work, what happens if I can bring 2 companies together who can complement each other in the business market? One may be an electrician, one may be a general contractor, or even 2 general contractors who may not on their own have the capacity to do the work. You know, they have the knowledge, they are able to do it, but they don't have the capacity as far as manpower, as far as financing. But if they came together, 2 of them together would be able to not only work this project as a prime, or even to take a larger subcontracting process, because some of our subcontracts can be in the multi-million dollars. So it'll be really good for them to be able to do so.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I think brings you great pride. I know brings me great pride is when we see the actual numbers of not goals, but in what is actually accomplished. And you know, you talked about we had a 26% goal on our concourse modernization, I think it was, and the actual contracts were higher than that. Let's talk a little bit about our concessionaires in our concourses and terminals. You know, we have food and gift, or food and beverage, and news and gift. So talk a little bit about the accomplishments and how we did that in our last program, and the fact that how we're looking outside the box and trying to meet the goals in the new program.
Excellent. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we're really excited about is the fact that our MWBEs and DBEs and ACDBs, in this case being the Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, are those who now not only stepped up to meet, you know, like the need of what was going on at the time, but to be quite honest with you, they are doing as well, if not better, than some of the prime relationships. So they've entered into joint agreements and management agreements, as well as other joint venture agreements with some of the primes, and can actually stand alone. We have a few that are doing very well, and they are consistently doing very well, which is another big thing for us, the consistency of companies growing and developing. We've had companies who started out with one concession, but because they had the wherewithal to develop and grow almost on the spot, they were given another opportunity to go ahead and open up a second location. Why? Because at the time there was an immediate need, because obviously when we had the issue with the dehubbing, we had prime contractors who said, well, we're going to go here, but our local MWBE, ACDBEs stepped up, filled those voids, and did a wonderful job at it. So we're seeing that happen. Now, of course, and the new dynamic that is as it relates to where we go moving forward, there's always an intent, always, again, that intentionality of seeing our MWBEs, our ACDBEs challenged to continue to go on and go forward. So it's not an unusual thing to get a phone call from a concessionaire that says, hey, I'm working on a project. Can you sit down with me and help me develop this concept out? And we'll work with them. We'll work with them, if nothing else, Jen, to let them know that these availabilities are before you. What can we do to help you at least get connected with the right people? So those relationships outside of the work center is very good for us too. Tennessee Small Business Development Center is one of the ones that we use quite frequently. Our relationships that we've developed with the Intergovernmental Consortium Group, the City of Memphis, and Shelby County government, and all those other quasi-government agencies all come together, become think tanks, you know, looking at best practices. So it works really well.
Well, and I think, yeah, thank you, Joe. And I think that's one of the important things about our program is, you know, when the opportunity offered itself, we had no problem with saying, hey, would you look at, would you be willing to look at running this restaurant or expanding this because we have this need? And I think that's going to be one of the great things when we move into the new concourse is, our prime concessionaire, which is going to develop, kind of the national concepts and all that. They originally proposed to us that they look at doing a joint venture with minorities. And quite frankly, that can work fine in a lot of places. But in our case, we looked at, was there an opportunity to maintain the percentages that were goal or exceed the percentages, but at the same time, let those MWBEs, ACDBEs, in the case of concessions, let them go ahead and put their signature on something. Let them go ahead and run their own restaurant, as opposed to just being a minority partner to somebody else's ideas. And I think we're going to move forward in that vein in the new contract, which will give us a chance to directly contract with our local minority vendors and put that on display every day, because we're very proud of what this community, I read a fact somewhere once that Memphis has more small businesses and more small minority-owned businesses than any other metropolitan area in the country. And I think that's the backbone of what makes Memphis great, is that it's got that spirit, that entrepreneurial spirit that lets people grow their businesses. Joe, I just saw Bobby pop on. That means he may want to ask us some questions. So Bobby, why don't you take it over from here?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say this. I'm going to date myself a little bit and also just share something from a personal perspective. Scott, I can't say enough about you, sir. Man, there's a group of us who I go back years with, a lot of these people who worked in this space, right? The Carleys, the Joselles, the Joyce, the Tanyas, the Marks, so many people who worked in this space. And for many of us, to Joe's point, what he mentioned about how there was this working together across organizations. And I will be honest with you, that I think we've all looked at some point in time from different organizations and individuals and said this to ourselves. We all wish we had what Joe had, which is having somebody leading the organization who is serious and engaged with this. And I didn't say this from the beginning, but you guys are actually the inspiration for the title and why we're having this discussion, just because of the successes you all have had. And it's become from your leadership and Joe's, he has that military background, so he's a get her done kind of guy. So let me just thank both of you all for the conversation, and us being here is inspired by you all's example. I have some questions that have come in. I want to ask some of the questions I've jotted down. Do you get pushback from department leaders about the additional layer of complexity to the RFP process and vendor selection? Do you get any pushback from department leaders, or even, you know, your primes? Do you get any type of pushback, or what does it look like on y'all's end from your perspective?
Well, you know, Bobby, I'm gonna tell you, they don't give me pushback because I'm the one that's pushing the program.
That's right.
Joe may, on the other hand, have some pushback, but I think the important part of that vision is Joe's relationship with me. And I didn't say this in the beginning, but Joe and I have a great relationship. You know, we're down the hall from each other, and if I have a question, I go to Joe's office and we talk about it, or I get him on the phone. If somebody questions Joe knows he could walk in my office and talk to me about it, and we'll resolve it. And I think that was the important part from the beginning is, you know, right now, Joe in our diversity development department reports directly to me because of some staffing changes. That's not always been the case, but I think what has always been the case is on our org chart, there's a dotted line from Joe to me, and that connection's always been there. When I took over, I named Joe to the position he's in. Joe and I sat down, worked out the direction together, and you know, I rely very heavily on Joe, and I have tremendous faith in Joe. And so I think that's what everyone else in my organization sees. You know, in the airport authority, they see that I embrace what Joe and his team do, and so I think they then are inspired to embrace it, and I use that term politely, are inspired to as well. So, Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, and to take it a little further too, Bobby, be mindful of the fact that oftentimes it's success is what's going to drive what's going to happen next. We've had good success stories, whereas that we've been able to literally introduce to these different department heads, as you stated, that here's a company who's ready, willing, and able to do it. We've talked to them. We feel confident in their ability to perform. We've looked at their track record, and we advocate on their behalf. And because of it, those companies have not only stepped up, but they've knocked it out the park, and they've been able to do a great job at it. Now, I would love to tell you that every story has a happy ending, and every one of them is always perfectly and great, but that would not necessarily be true. But the reality is that our department heads and all of our directors internally, they actually ask the question, Joe, what do you think? How can we move with this? What can we do? Even in our board, when we sit down to go over our resolutions for the board that particular month, if there's a question that's on hand, there's never a concern, whereas that, how do we handle this? If I was to stand up and give response to it, that, okay, it's accepted, it goes in. So it's across the board. The buy-in is totally across the board.
Well, and Bobby, that's the important part, is not only do I have the faith and the trust in Joe that when he talks about what they did and how they did it, in a board meeting, when a question comes up and I say, you know, and I ask Joe to talk about what he and his team have done, the board accepts that. The board says, you know, we trust Joe to give us the right answer and to do the right thing. And that's one of those things we talk about in the airport authority is do the right thing. You know, that's what's more important. And when you do the right thing, everything else seems to work out. But the board is, you talk about from the top. It doesn't get any more top than that. And the board embraces it also, across, you know. And so knowing that, we can go forward and accomplish great things.
That's great. And I want to just reiterate that from the top, that all of our CEOs and presidents, that, you know, you're being engaged in this space is so meaningful and people see it. You know, it's not necessarily what you say, but it's what you do after you have said it. If it is important, let us see those actions that back it up. Okay, let me ask you this, Joe. Can you talk a little bit about forecasting? This actually came up, we were having a conversation yesterday with a group of us on a call on the subject of MWBE participation, and the subject of forecasting came up. And can you talk about what it is, why it is important in this space? Love to hear you give some context to that.
Well, oftentimes when you think about forecasting, I mean, at the end of the day, every business has what they have as their wish list, the things that they really want to see done, get done. And, you know, much of this either is based off dollars that is already kind of allocated. And then there are some that are, well, we believe we'll be able to do it when the time comes, whatever that type of financing is. So when we began looking at forecasting, it is imperative for us to begin looking at not just the project that comes out, but let's break that project down. We need to be able to look at it. It's easy to say that I have a runway job that's coming up, and that runway job is going to be a $20 million project. But I need to know the nucleus of that runway job. What is electrical? What is paving? How much is there going to be concrete paving to that? How much joint seal is going to be a part of that? So we got to look at each piece of that puzzle. And then my team, as I said, we get together and we start looking at, okay, here's something that's coming down the pipe. And because of it, we need to be able to identify where opportunities exist. And then we need to look at the barriers that are there. The barriers are not just internally, the barriers are some of the financing that's going to take. A while ago, we had a joint seal program where we brought in companies to teach them how to do joint seal, because we knew that that was a part of a project that up until this point, we had no one who was either knowledgeable or had the ability to do it. So we brought those companies in and we went through a whole training module on how to do it. But then we also took note, here's one of the barriers. It is a capital intensive program. And in order for somebody to do it, they have to be ready to deal with the capitalization, because there's equipment that had to be bought. Some equipment you just can't rent, and you have to be able to buy it. So we need to let our MWBEs know there's not a reason that we don't want you to be a part. We need you to know what that barrier is and give you time to kind of suit up for it and get ready for it. So forecasting put us in a position where we're oftentimes able to look at the project, dissect the project, talk to our engineering and all our different staff members, all other department heads, and get everybody on board on what is it going to take for us to be able to make sure that we eliminate as many barriers as possible.
Yeah, let me say, Joe, you're dropping so many gems here that you're running through stuff that's so critical. And I'm wanting to make sure people are hearing so many pieces of it. You talked about how, and I'd like for you to even speak to this if there might be other examples, how basically there was a place where there was a need, where there's funding for this particular job that needs to be done, but you can't find anybody MWBE in that space. If I heard you right, you just talked to how you helped to try to use the influence of the airport authority to try to grow someone into that space for future work. Say more about that, or just the idea that problem sourcing is an issue. I've said this yesterday on the call, where you don't always have MWBEs in certain spaces. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not getting you all confused with the lazy folks who don't ask the right people about who is in that space. I'm speaking to the fact that you do run into a wall off and on where there's not anybody MWBE who does a certain thing. Talk about helping to grow people in that space, or how you've helped to problem solve for that.
Well, sure, no problem. One thing we try to keep in mind, there's a difference between capability and capacity. You know, there's a lot of companies who are capable of doing the work, but don't necessarily have the capacity. And the capacity in this case does not necessarily mean that they don't have the dollars alone, but it could be dollars, it could be labor, it could be just that they have not looked at their business model and decided on what's best. We have a lot of companies who they do, look here, I can do 5 different things, but I need you to find your hedgehog is what I tell them. I need you to find that one thing that you're best in the world at and grow that part of your business so that then you'll be able to do other things. So again, like you say, when we took that opportunity, and let me just say, that was my predecessor. That wasn't me specifically, but I was on team with it. And part of that whole idea concept then was to identify a need. And where is that need at? You know, when you look at your forecasting for work, on the other side of it, I'm also looking at my forecasting to say where my dollars are being spent. And when I look at where my dollars are being spent and I see that there is an area where I do not have any participation and have not had any participation, that's a problem. I need to try to find out why I'm underutilized in that area. And then there are other areas where I'm overutilized, and you know, I don't want to take that opportunity away, but I want to see how I can grow it as well. So you're right. We look for opportunities to see how we can better utilize those companies, how we can bring, I spoke earlier how we brought companies in together and we said to them, okay, here's a project that's coming up that I feel confident that many of you all have the capacity to do, but your capacity level stops when it comes down to your financial ability to capitalize the project. If you can't capitalize the project individually, let's talk about what happens if you joint venture. Let's talk about what happens when you join forces together. And it doesn't have to be a permanent joint venture. It's for this project. This project may be a 2, 3 year, 5 year long project, and maybe something will grow out of that joint venture that would take them further, but at least it gets us on the page where we can see that there are opportunities that are being missed out on because companies kind of become to a point where I become my own island. We got to get past that.
Well, and Bobby, you know, just to follow up a little bit on that, you know, you got to have somebody do one of these things so that others, you know, you got to have success in order for others to try it. And so part of the reason why we're trying to bring companies together when necessary is because that's a way that a rising tide can float all boats. Okay. And, you know, if we just say this is too big for everyone, then we're not really letting the rising tide's not helping everyone. But if we take that opportunity and we don't want to bring anyone into a process for failure. We want to bring them in and we want to make them successful. That's the goal. And so, you know, the goal is at the end of the process, they have grown others in the process, and collectively, this much broader scope became stronger and became bigger than when it started. And that's really the goal. And we talk in terms of, you know, from sub to prime. And not every company is always prepared to be a prime. You know, they have to be intentional to become a prime the same way we are. But when they are, then we need to be prepared to work with them to help them do that.
Great. I actually have gotten a text message or a couple of messages. We actually have someone on the line who's mentioning they have a construction company. They're 3 years in, they have all of the credentials, but the bond capacity has been low. I heard you guys talk a little earlier about how you've navigated that, and love to maybe and we've talked a little bit about it already, but love to hear you maybe speak to how you guys have navigated some of those similar things. And we talked joint ventures, but love to hear you specifically talk to the whole bond capacity being low and what you guys have done in the past potentially.
Okay, great. What we've determined is this, that we know that bonding capacity is not something that you're going to get overnight. It's not like applying for a bond of X amount of dollars, and just because I pay X, I can be able to get that bond. We know that your credentials, your credit, your past performance, all those things are the things that's going to help you increase your bond capacity. So because of it, that's why I stated earlier, when we look at forecasted opportunities, we want to bring company in early. We don't want to wait because when the RFP goes out, you know, it's too late to start building bonding capacity. You know, that's something that happen over time. So we want to bring them in and talk to them early, and where one company cannot bond it alone, maybe two companies together can, you know, increase their bonding capacity. So we look at that as well. So bonding is one of those things we do. Now, internally, we have companies that we work with that could help companies who are looking at increasing their bonding capacity, and therefore be able to talk to them about what it's going to take for them to do so.
I'm here. I'm sorry. Let me ask you this. I do have love for you all to give the distinction. I mean, we know women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, DBE. For those who are uninitiated, talk to you a little bit more about those disadvantaged business and what that is, and where it works and where it's used even locally. That might even be helpful.
All right. Well, let's talk about that. That's a real good one. The DBE certification, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, is a lot different than the conceptual idea of a company who has its owner is disabled, not a disabled company, but a disadvantaged, being disenfranchised because maybe opportunities that was not afforded, it wasn't there, so therefore we want to identify them as such. So with that being said, so what is a disadvantaged company? Well, I've talked to WeBank. I think we've had a good relationship with WeBank. WeBank is women-owned businesses, and a disadvantaged business as well as a minority business enterprise. A DBE is a company who's already met those criteria. They're already women-owned or they're already minority-owned. They meet that criteria. But because more specifically, there is a governing body that is our 49 CFR Part 26. And under the 49 CFR Part 26, and we tell everybody, go look it up, first of all. The DBE program and the certification process is a free process because it's a federal program. And under that federal program, it already identifies a woman or a minority-owned business who is at least 51% or better owned can meet the baseline criteria. Now, the only other thing that really begins to separate a DBE company from a WBE or MBE is then becomes the gross receipts of that company. We realize that, first of all, that 51% or better owner has to own, manage, and control the business, and they have to have a personal net worth that is below $1.32 million. But that gross receipts of that company cannot exceed $23.9 million over a 3-year average. Well, we know that normally MBE's criteria is that you just got to be a minority business, 51% or better. Minority business could be a person or a conglomerate of people that make up that, and they still must manage and control. But the difference in the DBE is that, again, the max gross receipts of $23.9 million, and that 51% better owner or owners personal net worth cannot exceed $1.32 million. I've had opportunities that now with relationships with the city of Memphis. The city of Memphis now do its own certification, and because it now does its own certification and they follow the 49 CFR Part 26 as their baseline for their certification, that because of relationships, we can then take their certification for MBE, add in the PNW and the gross receipts part to allow them to become DBEs. So there's a maturation piece for them that they can go further with it. So we look at that.
And Bobby, you know, it's the airport authority has a tremendous number of regulations we got to file and we got to follow. And, you know, when it comes to concessions, there is a federal aviation regulation, that's what FAR is, that tells us what we have to do. There's also one that applies to construction, and it spells out who qualifies, who doesn't qualify, what the rules are. We don't write those. We don't develop them. We just have to, enforce them and follow them. And so, we're highly regulated. But we do try to figure out ways when we do our contracts where is there a way to separate things where we can bring other people to the table in a different way as opposed to bringing them together. One of the other things Joe and I talk about is how big our documents are when we send them out for RFP or RFQ or bid. If you think about the whole premise of a small business is, they're small. A big huge company may have hundreds of people. So they've got resources to look at a 1-inch thick, 2-inch thick document. But someone who's running a small business locally in Memphis may have 3, 5, 7, 10 employees. They may not be, and a lot of them have to be out doing the work. So the more complicated and the more junk you put in there, and I'll use that term, just because you want to, put paper in there, it doesn't make sense. So we talk about how do we reduce that burden to open the door to more people. And are we perfect? I don't know, but we certainly try to get rid of the stuff that's not important in our documents every time we get ready to issue one. And Joe and his team, they do a great job of monitoring that. And that's one of the things I would suggest other CEs do is look at what you require someone to get through to just participate in your process. Is it really reasonable?
Boy, that's strong. Boy, that is strong. I mean, honestly, that is so critical because, again, that just demonstrates a sensitivity to who you're dealing with on the other end. We don't have folks who have legal departments that sift through things. So simplifying, to your point, absolutely, you're right on with that. I want to ask this, and maybe this is, and I don't know, you all had the privilege of having lunch before the pandemic hit us big time. And it was someone who I think was almost of the many companies that we in fact have had someone chime in, Dottie, my dear friend who's chiming in, just speaking to the great program you all run there. And there are so many others like her who benefited from the work you all have done. And let me just say this, governmental and quasi-governmental programs are so important because while we're trying to crack the code on the private sector side, those public sector entities, governmental and quasi-governmental entities, help so many people get in the game and to help them to build themselves to better position them on the private sector side, if I can say that. And with that said, I'm wondering, are there any particular, I don't know if you want to name names, but anybody that you feel proud of that you guys have played such a critical role with? I'm thinking of the guy I had lunch with a few months back, but I'm wondering, are there anyone in particular you guys think of where you think of how you started with them and were able to see them grow and help them grow? Anybody come to mind? And I don't want you to feel a need to share names if you think they may not be open to it, but maybe general descriptions.
Well, again, not to, like you say, share names. Yeah, we've had good instances where we've seen companies who have enjoyed the benefit of being a subcontractor. And they've subcontracted on so many different projects, and they were excited about just being a participant on the project. However, we were able to talk to them about, okay, we're going to do something a little different. I want to see you start priming projects. Well, we've identified through our different processes, and here's one particular. We have a small business element that's part of our program. And under our small business element, we've identified that when we can identify a project that's $1 million or less, and it's primarily been in the area of construction, but when we can identify a project that's $1 million or less, then, and that project has the wherewithal that there are local MWBEs or DBEs in our marketplace who can work that project, then we want to make sure that we've now shifted that project from our all-in area and just put it in that small business, that they now only compete against other small business for $1 million projects and therefore ultimately become their own prime. So when we did that, we've had now a few wins in that small business element. And how dare they decide to go ahead and bid as a prime in our non-small and won. And they've done it several times. And now we're sitting at board meetings and it's like, here they go again. They're prime projects at $2, $3, $4, $6, $10 million. And it's really good to see that. Now, the good of that is that we're seeing that maturity grow. The other aspect of that is that eventually these companies grow. We want them to grow so much that, of course, our program says that once your business assets exceed $23.9 million, you kind of graduate from our program. But who did you bring on with you? And who did you bring behind you that can grow it too? So that's the other aspect of it. So yes, we've had several successes, without calling out specific names, of those companies who started out as being regularly just as subcontractors, but now are becoming primes.
And that, yeah, Joe's made a great point is that, it not just us engaging with a company to bring them to the table, it's encouraging them to then do the same thing, to bring other companies to the table with them that are minority companies. So as they grow, they're then developing someone to fill that space when they become a prime. It doesn't do any good to just, make it yourself when, you don't help anybody else make it. So, so we look at how do we do all, we can't be all things to all people, but how do we frame our program to inspire and to kind of grow that mindset with all of those that we do business with.
Scott, Joe, wonderful presentation, wonderful words. I'm going to switch it over to our president, but right before I do that, I want to invite everyone to join with us on Thursday at noon of next week for our panel discussion, where we'll be talking about getting real about supplier diversity, where we'll get more into some of the strategies that you heard from Joe and things that can be done for those businesses that are interested in diversifying in the space of who they use for vendors and contractors in the MWBE space more specifically. And with that said, again, Scott and Joe, thank you all so much for these wise words and nuggets and information. And I'm going to pitch it over to President and CEO of the Greater Memphis Chamber, Beverly Robertson. Beverly, are you with us?
I am with you. Can you hear me, Bobby?
I can hear you just fine.
Thank you. Scott and Joe, fantastic job. I really enjoyed it. Scott, I hope you are well and recuperating from your recent surgery. We are so happy to see you. And let me applaud you personally for the kind of work that you have done. You are truly shining examples of what is possible if they just take a few of the lessons that you have shared with us today. We will continue to sort of highlight you because you really are worthy for the work that you've done. And we know it hasn't been easy, but you've done a fantastic job and we appreciate you being with us today. So thank you. And please know that we will be calling on you again. So don't act like you don't know us when we come back this way. Okay. Thanks so much.
We'll be here for you, Beverly. And, I got a great team and we appreciate those kind words.
Thank you. Thank you a million. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great Thursday and the rest of your day. Thank you.